to another episode of The Way to Bee.
So hello and welcome. Happy Friday. Today is Friday, March the 25th, and this is episode number 152 of Backyard Beekeeping Questions and Answers. If you want to know what we're going to talk about today, please look down in the video description below and you'll see every topic in order, plus other links that are going to be helpful to you related to the topics that we discuss. So I want to thank you for being here. What's it doing outside? Raining. It's cold. How cold is it? 37 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 3 degrees Celsius. And guess what else is happening? We have snow coming. I know, it's the worst possible thing. So anyway, let's get right into it and start with question number 1. Brad Oliphant. My bee package arrives in the next day or two here in New York City, and we went from 60-degree weather to raining weather and chilly, like 40 degrees Fahrenheit. We have this weather for days in a row, so what if my package arrives in 3 days of 40-degree raining? Can I still empty the package onto an angled board in front of the hive and let them walk up into the hive? Or will this be too cold for them? I'm so nervous. What do you suggest? And so he just asked this question. That's why I said wait until tomorrow, which is today. So here's what we do. And this happens a lot, in fact, especially if you're in a northern area here in the United States because it's still cold and the bees have shipped up from southern or warmer regions. So you can end up receiving them in a snowstorm, which is what's predicted right now. So you can take them if you have a basement, let's say. You want to put the package, don't install them yet. Wait, because they can't forage. Immediately they're going to be challenged with keeping themselves warm. Keeping the queen warm. They don't have any brood to keep warm. That's the good news with a package. But for those that want to store them for a little bit before you can get out there and install them in your beehive, put them in a dark room that has decent air circulation but no drafts, and it should be cool. And most basements are in the 50s or 60s, and that's more than enough for the bees. Another thing you want to check out carefully before you store your package, make sure that their can, usually they come with syrup, sugar syrup. I hope they do. I hope they don't ship that solid feed that they did last year. Anyway, make sure that they have food and resources. And in the dark, they'll stay quiet. In fact, they'll stay quiet. If you have them in the dark and you turn on the light, you'll hear them whir up and the activity will kick in. Then you put them back in darkness and then they'll be totally quiet again. And when they're quiet, they're not active, they're saving resources, they're getting ready to be installed in that hive that you're going to put them in. So there you go. Do not try to install them. Because you want to install them when the temperatures are warm enough that they're not really challenged. You want them to be able to forage right away. When it's a newly installed package, we want to put syrup on them, 1-to-1 sugar syrup by weight. So 8 pounds of sugar, 1 gallon of water. Mix it up and put that out there so they have resources. Very important and a good question right now, so don't try to install them. Question number 2 from Rodney in Muskego, Wisconsin. I currently have 3 colonies and just completed building my first long Langstroth horizontal hive. I want to use my existing colonies to start my 4th. What suggestions can you give me? Should I allow them to make a queen or buy one? So when you're splitting, you're going to spread things out, make new colonies. Great time of year to do that. Letting them make their own queen means that genetically, I think you're probably going to get a very well adapted regional queen because we've come out of winter. And same story that I tell every spring. If they've made it through winter, you have some hardy stock. But there's a delay. So in other words, what's the delay? Well, if you let them make their own queen, that means you're giving them eggs, for example, or if you've discovered queen cells, you can migrate those. That happens pretty quick. But then you've got 14 days from egg to queen hatching out of her cell. So then you've got another 9 to 14 days after that for the queen to mature and get good enough weather to go out and make her flight. Plus, we need drones in the environment so that she can mate well. So you're 30 days out roughly from the time you'll see new stock of bees. Now, on the flip side of that, if you bring in a queen that's mated, known genetics, and you pick them from a company that you like, and this time of year, we don't have to worry so much about the high heat getting to them in transit when they ship from the west, for example. And but the good news is, as soon as you install that queen, 2 or 3 days of introduction in general, because they're going to chew the candy plug out and the queen's going to get out, and then she's going to start laying in the colonies. Now we're 21 days after that. From the time she's out and begins laying, you're 21 days before you start seeing brand new nurse bees. So what did you save? Roughly 10 days, 11 days in production by the difference between letting them make their own and putting yours out there before the queen is even ready to mate. So now we're how far out? You're way behind when they make their own. So it depends on your goals. If you want that queen to just keep the colony alive, then you can let them make their own, but they're going to dwindle for the entire time it takes that queen that you're growing on your own to mature, cap, pupate, hatch. And then let's see, she's hatched out. She's not ready to mate yet. So now, again, you're much longer. You're losing 1,000 to 1,500 new bees every day in spring that you do not have a laying queen in the colony. So the longer she stays in the cage when they come in and you're installing them, or if you're waiting for them to hatch out a new one in the absence of the queen that was on the colony, your numbers are very different. So if you're just a backyard beekeeper and you don't care and a small colony keeps them from swarming, you've got that. Plus you've got a brood break when you have the queen that they produce on their own. And that's an opportunity for you to give them oxalic acid vaporization if they had a mite issue, which when you bring in the queen in the cage and you're going to install her, then there's not a big enough overlap there where you'll be completely free of capped brood. So you won't be removing any protection from the reproducing mites in there when you fly in a queen. So there are trade-offs. And it doesn't say what the purpose is for the colonies or how much you need them to grow. Now, me personally, what would I do? I make my own queens right here. Unless I'm doing an experiment or something and I need a queen right away, I don't buy in queens anymore, but if I do, I get them from Bee Weaver. I know. And other than that, I just grow my own. I've had very good luck with that. By the way, my winter survival rate was very good. We had 20 colonies going into winter. We are at 17. Yeah, 17 colonies now. So we lost 3 colonies. And they just did the head count in my region, and everybody reported in on their losses. We had a standard average loss, including some of our commercial people, 40% losses of colonies. So mine did really well. And the only treatments I used on them last year were oxalic acid vaporization, if at all, on any. And that was based on mite counts. So I'm pretty happy with the way things are going this spring. And the only insulation we did on the hives was the insulated inner cover with the feeder shim on top and the insulated outer cover. No insulated sidewalls, single entrance, no top venting, no top entrances. And my biggest concern this spring is going to be that I will have too many bees. So you have to consider, do you need production out of them? Or you're trying to keep things going? You got to bring in a mated queen that's ready to go when she hits the street. As soon as you put her in the hive, 3 days, she's laying. So that's your fastest recovery. If you don't care and you don't have any pressing reasons for having bees other than having the bees, let them grow their own. Get a better bee for your area. That's what I think overall in general. So do the math yourself. I know I shot from the hip on that, but just do a calculus and see what happens when you start from scratch with eggs in your own colony. Give them the 14 days from egg to a queen hatching, and then the 9 to 12 to 14 days for her to mature and do mating flights. Then beyond that, the 21 days before you'll see new bees in the colony, and you'll find out 1,000 to 1,500 bees per day that she's not producing eggs. It's quite a number. So it just depends on what you want. Small colonies tend to do very well, by the way. Question number 3, Scott from Ferry, Connecticut. Ooh, Gales Ferry, Connecticut, by the way. Little known fact, I used to work for a company called Aquasports right there. Victor Wurst, Legends of Diving, U.S. Navy deep sea diver. Anyway, how are you feeding syrup to a Layens hive when installing a package? Very good question, because the Layens Hive, as we all know, if you bought yours where I did from horizontalhive.com, I don't know if it's Horizontal Hive or Horizontal Hives, Dr. Leo's website, I got the Layens Hive, and because he doesn't encourage you to feed them, so when you install your package and you've got your queen, they have to forage for everything they're supposed to get. But just in case you have to have a method to feed them, they sell the Layens-sized, just happen to have it right here, Layens-sized frame feeder. So that comes from Dr. Leo's website. It has all the little ridges on it, so your bees can climb up it really well. I highly recommend you put some kind of floating material in here to cut down on the surface area and make sure that your bees can't get in there and drown. So something that will float and will fit in between those channels. Let's see what I'm looking at there. So you want to make sure that it will lower with the level of the syrup. And the other thing you'll notice about this design is each of these chambers is insulated from the other. So you could have one channel that goes way down while the other two are still full and so on, which will kind of let you know probably on the south side or the east side, depending on how your hive is configured. That's where you'll see the most consumption of syrup because it warms up the fastest there. But yeah, they sell them. Frame feeders. Who knew? And then what I had to do was put a board over the top of it because there's no board that covers this. And you'll see that it has these ears that stick up. So you can get a board that goes right between that, and you can cover it and put some control there because you don't want to provide a big open space so now all your bees go over this, get out, and walk all over the top of all your other frames. The whole point of that Layens design is that they would be blocked by a follower board, and then all the tops of the frames come together completely so there's no space, as there is with Langstroth frames, that the bees can come up between the frames, go over the top, down the next frame. They can't do that with the Layens Hive as it comes from Dr. Leo's website. So yeah, they sell them right there. So that's what I recommend. You go there, tell them Fred sent you, Frederick Dunn specifically, because I want to make sure that you'll be able to pay the same as everybody else, even when you mention my name. Question number 4. This is from Jason, Strafford, Missouri. Can you share your thoughts and opinion on rotating brood boxes coming out of spring? By the way, this question is almost asked every weekend now. So I have answered it before, but apparently it's coming up so often, this is not the only person that asked it, that will address it again. If the bees are in the second upper box with the lower box being mostly empty, would you think it is best to leave them as they are? Yes, I'm going to stop right there. Yes, I leave the boxes as they are. All of my hives have at least a single deep box. And that's my brood box. It's always going to be my brood box. It never gets used for anything else, except if the bees themselves store honey, nectar, pollen, and other resources for the brood. Then it's up to them how they use it. Now the second box, a medium super, is also just for the bees. So I'm never going to harvest from it. So I don't care how it gets used. In other words, when we look at the profile of the frame, so if this is the frame, and by the way, when you use one-piece plastic frames, you get more bees per frame simply because we don't have the big wooden space up here that uses up the top row of cells and things like that. But when it comes to your brood boxes, your brood frames, they can be foundationless. And that's because they're never going to go through an extractor. They're never going to be exposed to that kind of force. So they don't have to be wired and reinforced and everything else unless it's better comb, because that stuff does not hold up unless it's got wires going through it. But so my brood boxes all have this. And you'll see that as they fill this with brood, the arch will stop near the top. And then so when we have the medium frame above this, you'll see a tiny arch of brood go up into that. So now we've got our two frames, the deep and the medium. Some people go 2 deeps. I've got hives out there right now with 2 deeps, but I'll tell you this. My deep brood boxes with the medium frame configuration do better in winter than the double deeps here. 10 frame, by the way, not 8 frame. 8 frames I'm going to start moving away from and not using at all, and that's just because I'm always running around like a chicken with my head cut off trying to find 10 frame supers. Then I find a pile of 8 frame supers, and I want to have all my frames as far as the boxes go. I want them all to be 10 frame boxes now going forward. So that's the other thing I've changed. I used to have 8 and 10. They both get through winter equally. They both kind of perform the same. But I want them all to be 10 frames. There are some pieces of equipment that only come in 10 frame gear. So if you're looking for the most compatible configuration, 10 frame has the most gear associated with it. There's a lot of 8 frame equipment too and interchangeable equipment, but 10 is what I've arrived at. So for me, 2 boxes, a deep and a medium, unless it's a late season swarm, then it's a deep only. Now when I have that medium and here comes spring and the bees are all up in the top of it, and that's where they're starting their brood right now, right this minute with the snow coming, then when I pull that box on the top, because now the theory is, and it's played out in observation, that the bottom frames where the brood was, they're now empty. So the thinking is to swap them and put the deep box above, and I've got the medium box down below, or if you've got all mediums, now the medium's down there and you rotate your medium boxes. I say don't do it. And that's because they've organized their brood area. Plus the bees naturally gravitate down to a previously used comb where the brood has been in the past. And they'll start to store their honey on top and migrate that down. And that is reinforced by every feral colony that we can find that is unmanipulated by people. That each year the cycle is the same. Even, let's say, in a bee tree. I know we're not keeping bees in bee trees, but the organization of their resources and where they keep their brood is the same. The brood naturally gravitates down towards the entrance, wherever the entrance is, and they start to backfill with honey for the next winter, because that's all they're doing is getting ready for 2 things. Reproduction of the colony, which is swarming, and they're storing resources excuse me, so they can get through the coming winter, which is several months away. And they do that by storing those honey resources up above, so they naturally will move down. The other thing is I see this cyclically when I look at my observation hive. I'm not rotating any frames in the observation hive. We're just seeing what they do with them. And they always pile their honey up at the top, and they always migrate their brood at the lower fringe of wherever their honey stores are. And if they start to get a surplus of honey, they keep moving the brood down, and that's when they run out of space. When all those bottom frames are full, and they're full of brood, and all the upper frames and cells are full of honey, that's when they're going to reproduce, they're going to kick off a swarm, and the queen's going to leave because now they can afford to split and start a new colony, which biologically is exactly what they want to do. I don't rotate the boxes. So even if you're all mediums, because somebody else wrote about all medium boxes, and just as I explained to them, they had 2 medium boxes full of brood, the big, the basketball profile, and then up above that, a little arch going up into the 3rd medium box, which is the equivalent to what? A single deep and medium box. So if that's your configuration, single deep and a medium, that's all you need for the backyard beekeeper. So I don't rotate them at all. There's no reason to break it up and reorganize the way they're using their cells. So that's it. Rotating boxes. This is a real... Some people really get upset if somebody suggests not rotating boxes, and other people get upset if they say do rotate boxes. So there's another person that I frequently go to, Dr. Thomas Seeley. What do you think he recommends? He recommends not rotating the boxes, but it plays out when you look at them. And in spring, what are they doing already? They're already building brood. So you could be, look what you did, by the way. If we have the 2-box configuration going into winter, and they're up in that top box, they're not all consolidated into that top box. So what they've done is they've started to build brood, and the little arch of brood goes down into the deeper frames of the box below. Even if those are all medium boxes, that little arch of brood also goes down there. Now we split the boxes, right? We get this little low arch down here. You take that box and you put it up here. Where did you just put the brood? The main brood now is down here, and you've got this isolated patch of brood up at the top. See, you threw them for a loop. So I recommend, based on my practices and observations, not rotating boxes. And I also like this ladder rack because that pushes the entrance lower, again below them, 2-inch spacer, and now they're more apt to move down sooner because they want to get near as the temperatures warm up and those resources are coming in, they get closer to the entrance, and that's why I also only have single entrances. Question number 5. Okay, I can't say this name. Vytautas from Lithuania. It says, my bees died, so I ordered a new Nucleus Colony. It will come with deep frames, and all of my equipment are medium boxes. So I have to use 2 boxes. What configuration should I add to those frames? Okay, this is the other thing. And a lot of you won't like my answer, because I've got questions on both sides of the street now. People are buying Nucleus Colonies. Now, when you get a package of bees, the package is just the bees and the queen, and they can dump into any configuration you have. Long Lang, Layens Hive, any kind of observation hive, any hive, they adapt because they don't have set frames and comb in that package. When you get a nucleus of hives, which everybody calls nukes for short, that means you have completed frames with brood, with resources, with a laying queen who's not in a cage, she's loose in there, and this is the fastest buildup you can get. Here's what I'm going to say that you're not going to like. Well, a lot of people won't like it. Some people will just see it as practical. When you're looking at someone to buy your nucleus bees from, ask them, I'm just a medium-sized box beekeeper, let's say. If you were, then you would be looking for medium nucleus hives, nucleus colonies, because they're usually 4 or 5 frames, and if they're mediums, then they'll go right into your medium equipment. If you have a deep box, which I highly recommend is your brood box, based on the things I've already described, then look for someone selling nucleus colonies of bees that are also on deep frames. Please don't try to adapt deep frames into multiple mediums, for example, which will leave you with a big space underneath of them, which will cause bird comb and other challenges going forward. So you have a couple of options. The first option is that I recommend you buy from a seller who is selling nucleus colonies in the configurations that match the box that you're going to put them in. Flip side of that, you just love that breeder so much, their bees are so good, and they only sell medium nukes, which, by the way, I hope they're selling them cheaper than if they were deep, because you're getting fewer bees, fewer brood, and everything else. So you need to have medium boxes. If you want deeps, you're going to have to invest. I highly recommend you invest in a deep box to put them in. So don't try to reconfigure things, adding 2 boxes together to accommodate deep frames. Please just buy a deep box. You got time. You haven't got your bees yet. Get the box that matches the nucleus colony that you're going to get. If you've got mediums and you order from somebody who's got a deep, you got a problem if you're going to just jam them into 2 medium boxes and have that bottom box empty so that it'll accommodate that deeper frame. It's just trouble down the road. So either buy equipment that matches the nucleus colony that you're going to buy, or buy nucleus colonies from people that match the equipment that you have that you intend to use. Because personally, I can't, give practical information based on my personal experience about how I would modify a box, shallow boxes to accommodate deep frames, or a deep box to accommodate medium frames. Because now there's a bunch of open space underneath the frames when you put them in. So you do have time, though, when you know that. So it's something to ask people when you're buying a nucleus colony. Know what's coming so that you can have your hive configured to match the frames that are coming in. Highly recommend not modifying your equipment to accommodate medium or deep frames. Have the right size hive equipment for them. Question number 6, Craig Kirby. Let's see, just watch a few more videos, and it seems, as you said, you can't stop the flow once you start it. This is talking about flow frames. This comes up, and I know, by the way, Cedar Anderson, the inventor of this system, I did an interview with him. Very interesting backstory if you haven't caught it yet. But the way the flow frames work, here's a tube in the back. It gets activated up here. So when you open these, they split the frames. Honey drips down. You pull this plug out. Honey runs out the back. And I always say, there's no valve on this. You hear people say things like, well, just put a valve on it. Put a glove valve on here. You can turn it on and off once these are activated. No, because once they're activated, you need to drain all the honey out. Otherwise, the honey will run out the sides. And every Tuesday night, the Flow company, Cedar Anderson and others, do live streams on their channel. And one of the things that he's recommended is putting your key in and letting the key only going part way in, turn it, and that means just these frames from here back would be open, and then you just drained off a pint of honey, let's say. This entire frame yields a half a gallon of honey. Now, I hate to go against cedar, but it's just a personal preference choice. Because, by the way, you can't unload this side of the frame and then leave this frame closed, because the way the keys are set, they go through and they're going to open in increments all the way to the end. And the reason I recommend that you finish off the frame is because now look at where our window is. This is the window where we can see once they've filled the cells again, because bees store their honey from the center out, and that's why you can't, by the way, even look at this end, because that side of the Flow Super doesn't open. The back side opens. That's what we're looking at. Up here is the end of a Flow Super. So I recommend have your stuff ready and just draw off all the honey from a single frame at a time. And then you'll know that when this is built back up and these cells are sealed with wax again, there's cap wax on everything, that the whole frame is full again and you're ready to go. When you do the half frames, you don't know what's going on the whole frame, what's going on, and sometimes they even consume honey out of a small arch here in the middle, and that won't be capped yet, or it'll be empty. So what they do is they go after, remember, open cells first when they need nectar resources, because let's say they've stored honey. They made honey and they filled all these frames. And then what happens is we get a whole bunch of rain, and they didn't cap this yet. But what you did was you pulled off this end, so all this is uncapped, all this is still capped and full of honey. So now what they end up doing is going up into this and taking all the honey out of it when they need it, because it's new and it's not yet capped. And what they would have done before is just come up here and made a little arch in here and uncapped honey and consumed it, or consumed kind of equally the cells that were being gradually filled with honey once you drained off the whole thing. But unless you're pulling these frames out and looking at them to see what the progress is, I see no reason not to drain off the entire half gallon at once, because if they're capped here on the ends, this whole field is capped. So I highly recommend, you don't have to do all 7 frames or 6 frames, whatever you have in your super, but if you do a frame, I highly recommend you drain that entire frame and give the bees a fresh start on the whole thing at once. And Cedar Anderson, he's the inventor. He says you can do part of it, and you can. I'm just explaining my theory behind why I don't personally like to do that, since the question came my way. So there's that. Question number 7 comes from John Summers, Fredericksburg, Texas. My question is, how cold is too cold to begin feeding syrup in spring? Here in Texas Hill Country, we have days in the 80s to 85 degrees and lows in the 60s one week, and the next week high temps might be 45 with lows in the lower 30s. Our bees are beginning to brood, but nothing is flowering yet. And this is a very good description. The bees are brooding and nothing is flowering yet, so they do need feed. And one of the things we're going to talk about at the very end of today's video is the feed to give them that is performing the best. So they need 2 kinds of feed. They'll need protein. So, and the other thing is they're going to need the liquid syrup. And we can feed liquid based on these temperature descriptions. One of the reasons we don't feed liquid syrup in the middle of winter is because the bees can be trapped inside, too cold to fly, and they're unable to eliminate. So when we have temperatures like this, let's say it does drop into the 30s at night, that's okay, because the following day we get temps that go right up into the 60s, and we know that bees will fly out on a sunny day even if it's 48, 49 degrees Fahrenheit. So they'll fly out and eliminate, and they can still get back to their hive. Hits the 50s or higher, they can even go out and forage in a meaningful way. And we did all those practical temperature tests right here. So I say that you're good to feed syrup. Now the other thing is, when you're going to super your colony, I'm just saying this because somebody might be watching this, they might be brand new to my channel. Don't feed syrup on colonies that you plan to build up that you're going to use the honey resources from. So once you get past those bottom 2 boxes or whatever, which are all for the bees, before you put on supers, you should stop feeding straight sucrose, which is just sugar syrup. So, and also, watch at the very end, we're going to talk a little bit about pollen patties and things like that, which are performing well this time of year. Something else to think about. But yeah, you could put that on based on those descriptions. You could put syrup on right now to help extend them through this dearth period, especially with all that brood that's in there. Question number 8, Andrew, Hudson, Michigan. Very curious what your plans are for the Layens Hive this year. I know you don't like to reuse equipment and dead outs, but that's quite a hassle because of the incompatibility. Will you install a new package to the box, all brand new frames, or do you have a way to salvage that unique comb? And by unique comb, it means those Layens frames. And I did buy the foundation, that expensive wax foundation that comes from Dr. Leo too, at Horizontal Hives. I'll put a link down in the video description so you can go look at that stuff yourself. It comes from a part of the world where there supposedly is no chemical residue from industrial agriculture. And by the way, that beeswax is very thick. So would I throw it away from the dead out in a Layens? Well, that depends on the reason for the dead out. If I'm looking at that and the brood looks okay and it looks like they just dwindled and they couldn't handle winter, or I don't see evidence of brood disease and things like that, bring in an educated friend who can look over your frames with you, because not every dead out requires removal of all the resources, especially drawn comb. So my plan for my Layens hive is to leave the drawn comb that's in there, and I will be installing a swarm. A local swarm, hopefully, that will come from one of my own colonies. And I will try to hive them that way. So if you're installing a package, same thing. I would keep as much of those frames and resources and drawn comb as you can, unless it looks like something's wrong with it. I know that you can't just look at it and tell always if something's wrong, but you certainly can tell when there's been a brood issue, where there's diseased brood, greasy brood, chalk brood, things like that. I would cut out sections of chalk brood, dead, anything that doesn't look like it just starved and died. Because the other thing is, one of the most common reasons that people are losing their colonies this spring, mite overloads going into fall and winter, and then failed queens. So once the queen dies out, you'll see just a very small collection of bees on the hive, clustered, kind of pointing in the same direction. A lot of them will have their faces in the cells and their little abdomen sticking out, and those are not alarming to me. When you see a spread out pattern where the bees like froze individually, spread all over the place, now we have some concerns. You want to really look carefully at that comb, and again, bring in someone who's educated that can look at that and help you determine what should be reused and what should not be. But I'm not throwing that stuff out. I am giving that Layens another try. It got, it had a late season swarm that was not very large last year, and I did get a colony of bees in there. They were looking good, but their numbers just didn't build up. They just weren't big enough, and we need to talk to Dr. Leo more about this stuff. So we have a lot to learn about that natural approach to beekeeping, but I would not throw it away. I would keep it and use it unless there was something conspicuously wrong with the bees and the brood and things like that. Question number 9. Janine from Cayuga, Indiana says, please clarify, when adding bees from one colony to another, I've seen newspaper methods, screen boards, etc. to allow them time to get to know one another to prevent widespread slaughter. Okay, so that method, by the way, I'm going to stop at that part of the question. Putting newsprint on, so the existing strong colony is the resident colony. Then you take off your inner cover and you put newsprint on there. And the newsprint that I use has no newsprint on it. It's just that kind of paper, and it's very thin. And you can cut little tiny holes in it, and this creates a barrier for the bees that they're going to overcome pretty darn fast, but it slows the introduction from one colony to the next. So then you put your weaker colony on top in their box with their frames, and they eventually end up migrating right down and joining all of the others right through the paper. And then you'll see them tearing the bits and pieces of paper, and they'll be removing it from the hive. And at the time that you do that, I highly recommend spritzing the paper with Honeybee Healthy with sugar syrup, or doing some other thing that alters the scent inside the hive, which provides the bees with a favorable experience like sugar syrup. So then, she continues, then in the next video I watched, the beekeeper is grabbing frames of bees from different hives, shaking them into a box together for a package or queen rearing, or brood and bees from a resource hive is plugged into a weak hive. What is the deal? Is it necessary to allow them to get to know one another or not? Okay, so there's a lot going on there. When you're reinforcing another hive that's failing, usually it's because they've lost their queen. And I did this in a video last year that was with a young man that was here from Albuquerque, New Mexico, Eli, and we found a colony that was without a queen. So they had no eggs. They only had very old brood that was about to be capped. And so that's, 8-day-old brood, for example. So they had been without a queen that's been laying for at least 8 days. And so here's the thing. What I did was we went and pulled a frame of eggs, and we walked them right over there with nurse bees on it. And we put 2 frames right into that hive full of capped brood, eggs, and resources so they could make a new queen. And by the way, it worked really well. But what did we bring with them? We brought their pheromones. We brought their scent of a queen-right colony. And keep in mind, we're putting them in a queen-free colony. A colony that needs a queen, wants a queen, looking for the pheromone. They've only been without a queen for less than 2 weeks. And they were happy to receive those bees, and there was no fighting. So it depends on the circumstances of what's going on. Now, the next part of this is when they're making packages, they grab bees from a bunch of different colonies, and if they're shaking them off the brood frames, then they're shaking off a lot of queen bees. Those are very passive bees. They're not likely to fight. Your guard bees are older bees in the colony. But they're shaking them all together at one time. Not only that, they're creating a package, and in that package, they have no investment there. They're not defending anything. There's no brood, there's no queen, there's nothing to defend, and that's why they're introducing a new queen that's unfamiliar to them in a cage, and then they're shipping them off. And it's in transit that they're starting to get the pheromone from that queen through the screen of the queen cage, which is right here. They're going to be sticking their tongues in there. They're going to be sharing with the queen through trophallaxis, and their tongues are going to stick out, and she's going to feed from them, and they're going to spread her pheromone physically from one bee to the next in the package while they're in transit, and that's supposed to help them out. So again, that's not a resident colony, so the defensive behavior is reduced. And they're nurse bees, which are by nature not that defensive. That's why when you open up a frame or open up a colony and you pull a frame of brood, and this is the brood frame that's got all the open brood and the capped brood and everything else. You got a sea of bees on there, and people stick their fingers in there and push them around so they can see what's going on. And you're thinking, why aren't those bees stinging their fingers? They're nurse bees. They're total pushovers. They don't care what you do to them. You could put your hand right on a larva, and they'll crawl up onto your hand. They won't sting you. Now you'll have a different experience down in the bottom at the entrance where you're pushing things around with potential guard bees. Also, you can get some resistance and defensiveness from up in your honey stores and things like that. So it's a matter of where they are in the colony and what kind of bees we're transferring around as to whether or not they'd be feisty or not. But I hope that helps. And when you've got a queenless colony and we don't have laying workers yet, that's why they're so easily robbed, by the way, too, because they lack the cohesiveness that they would need to be invested in the resources there enough to defend them by giving their lives by stinging things. So after the 3rd week of being queenlessness and you've got laying workers, that's when they all of a sudden change their attitudes and become defensive again. So I hope that helps maybe a little bit, but that's what's going on. Package bees, they're dumping them all together. They don't know what's going on. Question number 10 comes from Seth Dobrin, Ridgefield, Connecticut. 2 questions from Connecticut today. I'm finishing my first year as a beekeeper, and my hive, only one so far, is booming. It was 72 here yesterday, so I opened it up, and it is full of bees. I have a 2-deep configuration. I have some flow frames I will use as my supers. I intend to do a walkaway split, and I have 2 questions. At what point is it okay to liquid feed again? So we kind of talked about that. When you're doing splits and things, providing feeds and provisions and stuff is a very good move because it helps them along as they recover. And you can do that when the temperatures are as described there. People have asked me around here about that. We have snow coming, so it's not the time to put liquid feed on. But first week of April, I would say, would not be a terrible time to start putting on liquid feed to help with splits and package installs and things like that. And at what point is it okay to add liquid feed, and how do I know when I can do a walkaway split? So the walkaway split, for those of you who don't know, that's when you find a nice strong colony, as described here, 2 deeps, by the way. You come up with your other deep box, because remember, deep frames, deep frames. So we come up with our deep box, and you'd be way ahead if you use a nucleus box, so a wooden 5-frame deep box. And you bring in the frames that are heavily waxed and ready to go, but they may not have drawn combs. So you're going to go over here, and you're going to make sure that we have drones flying, that we have decent temperatures around. The best time to do this is when they would do it themselves, but we want to head it off too, see? Because if they would reproduce themselves based on the population of this double deep configuration we're talking about, this is where you look at your records. So I know that I've captured swarms in my apiary at the end of April. So April 27th on is when I historically have found swarms here from my own apiary. So that means I got to get ahead of that by at least a week, because we want to make sure they haven't already committed to swarming and they're not already building queen cells and things like that, but we do want to see drones. So once you start to see the drones flying and things like that, about the 2nd week of April for me, that's the time for me to start looking at the oversized colonies that I want to do splits from and recover from those losses of colonies that I still have hive equipment out there for, and do those transfers of resources, split them up. And the walkaway split just means that we're pulling out frames that have brood of all ages, but they must include, some people say a newly hatched larva is okay, so the minute the egg hatches. I would suggest go safer than that. Make sure you're seeing eggs themselves and put eggs in the colony when you do the split. Migrate all that together. If you can find the queen, move her with your split, and that allows the colony, the resident colony, to refresh themselves, make a new queen, which they may already have in progress. They might already have queen cups that have become queen cells and things like that. So you've moved the queen with your resources, brood, eggs, open larvae. And if you can grab a frame of pollen's coming in really strong right now too, you'll move that with them, and then they'll have those resources and feed them. And do that in a 5-frame nucleus colony if you can. If not, a single deep is fine, but you concentrate all of those frames right in the middle, and then resource frames out from that, room for expansion. And a feeder on top, ready to go to keep them provisioned just in case it rains and you get some inclement weather. So then the resident colony that you took all that from, you take those frames of brood and you push them all together. I don't recommend checkerboarding those. Push the brood together so they can benefit from communal warmth and everything else. Is what the bees would do themselves. If you want to add frames at that point, add them outboard of that. And if you've got a frame of pollen or something like that, put that on the outside edge of your brood frame just to make room so that they have room for expansion, and they'll start to fill out that box again. So, and then don't even harass them. Don't even look for that replacement queen or anything until after a week. Check them out, see what's going on in there, and you should see queen cells after the other queen has left. You'll see queen cells by then. Multiples, and don't try to select which one of those queen cells you prefer. Don't go squishing them. I leave them all and as insurance and let them decide which of those queens is going to hatch first, be preferred by the workers, and take over that colony. Next question, number 11. Michael from East Helena, Montana. Currently I have 2 hives on our 4-acre property. Next to our property is a 30-acre field of alfalfa. I have a good relationship with the owner, and I'm sure he would tell me when he's going to spray. The question is, would I be better off moving the hives for a couple of weeks to another location or close off the hives for a day or two while he sprays? And it's very good that you have a farmer that's willing to talk to you about the alfalfa. So here's what you want to find out. What anybody wants to find out, by the way, if you're adjacent to a farmer, as I am. What are you going to spray? When are you going to spray it? And what is it? And then when you find out what it is, you do your own research. You find out what the impact is on pollinators. And because an alfalfa field, by the way, and I got into this years ago with somebody from Monsanto. It wasn't fun because their answers were, I was surprised that they would even talk to me anyway, Monsanto. But the thing wasn't, it was about alfalfa, because alfalfa is a fantastic resource for your bees. That's a major nectar flow. So you want your bees to be able to access it. And when do they spray and what do they spray? So these fungicides, herbicides, things like that to suppress competing plants and all of that. So you need to find out what the impact is on your bees. Generally, that's going to impact the brood, not the adult bees. Although some have been known to cause your bees to become disoriented and not find their way back to the colony. So there are things known as, there's a lethal dose, which kills your bees. There's sublethal doses. Sublethal exposure can cause your bees to just lose their mind a little bit and not be able to perform as well as they should. And the reason I bring all this up is there's a trade-off in that. In other words, you're also going to benefit from this huge nectar flow from these flowers. And the other thing, Canada, I think, shut down Monsanto alfalfa because they didn't want it affecting the native alfalfa, which makes sense, right? And then this is what led me to talk to the people at Monsanto. And they said all their instructions to the farmers include that you must harvest the alfalfa before it flowers. So then I went to our local Department of Agriculture and talked to the farmers there. And I talked to the president of the group there. And I said, how many people are getting their alfalfa off of their fields before it blooms? None of them. So that story, I understand they put that paperwork in with their seed that you buy from Monsanto and everything. But the truth of the matter is that it does bloom. And the bees then do cross-pollinate the Monsanto genetically modified alfalfa with the native alfalfa. And bees, as we know, can fly long distances. But here's the trade-off, and back to the original question. Find out what they're using and try to talk them into spraying at a time when the bees won't be on the alfalfa. So we know that the bulkier bees are going to be out there mid-50s and up. And although some bees forage as low as 49 degrees Fahrenheit, we've seen that. But mid-50s and up, the bulkier bees are out there foraging. And from 11 to 12, midday and beyond. So midday to the afternoon is also when most of your forages are out there. So the trade-off is you're going to lose a percentage of your brood. You're going to lose potentially, worst case scenario, potentially a percentage of your foragers. And but you're going to get a lot of honey, and the bees are going to benefit from the honey. And then the bees are also going to have the pollen, which means you're going to get more brood. So you might have a boost in your colony that exceeds the losses in your colony. And so this is why I say look up what they're using, because there will be lots of published information about it. And you can also, it's an opportunity, if you're a small-scale backyard beekeeper, you keep records. What did they use? When did they use it? When did your bees fly? What was the impact? Weigh your colonies ahead of time. Weigh your colonies afterwards. Count frames of brood. Count frames of nectar. Know how much honey is on your hive, and see what the gains and losses are. And you may find out that by staying in close proximity to the alfalfa fields, that you're actually going to gain much more than you lose. So it's an opportunity for practical testing. And talk your farmer friend into spraying at night, late evening, early morning, things like that. And you'll find that they're actually pretty, because they have a lot of fields to tend to, not just the ones adjacent to your property. And we know that our bees are going to go on to the flowers and stuff that are closest, that are nearby, because they're efficient. and they're going to get the nectar and pollen and everything that they can that's closer first. So that's my answer to that. There's much more to think about. And you can, by the way, win over farmers. You can. You can get them to see things your way. So that was the last question for the day, question number 11. Now we're in the fluff section, and I want to talk about what was on the cover of today's Q&A video, the thumbnail. Because what we have, first of all, if you submitted a question and it didn't get answered today, please submit questions. Those of you who are trying to submit multiple questions at a time, I'm only going to pick one of those to answer. So send one question in a week per viewer. And because I just can't do all of them, we'd be here all day. But I wanted to show you. This is a pollen patty that's getting my fingers all sticky. It's perforated on this side, solid on this side, nice and moist and wet. And who just published or has been recently talking about his nutritional studies, and that's Randy Oliver. And we just had Randy zoom in to our beekeeping club, the Northwest Pennsylvania Beekeepers Association. If you live anywhere near us, I invite you to join. We had Randy Oliver zoomed in live and answered questions about a lot of things, but he talked about pollen patties and which ones perform the best, and what I have in my hand is the one that performed the best commercially. So, and I wrote them down. Global patties, by the way, is what I'm holding in my hand, and they are the top performing commercially available pollen patties right now. And one of those that you might recognize is Hive Alive. Hive Alive pollen patties just came out. They contracted with Global, so they have this exact formula in Hive Alive, but they've also added to it Hive Alive, which suppresses nosema. So the Global patties, Hive Alive patties are the same, with the Hive Alive patties having the Hive Alive liquid in it that suppresses nosema, which in the springtime is the worst. The rest of the year it's not that big of a problem generally, but these are the ones that did the best. And the top one was actually Randy's home brew. So if you go to Scientific Beekeeping, Randy Oliver's website, I think he published the ingredients of home brew. So for those of you who make it yourself, you can actually make your own pollen patties. And then down the line, they also look at the charts and stuff on Randy's published studies now. He's done several series of nutrition for honeybees. But this was the one that, and I was talking with the people at Hive Alive because I interviewed Dara Scott, who's the inventor of Hive Alive in Ireland. And they were working with Global Patties then to make sure that they matched what was in Randy Oliver's study. So that's cool stuff too. What else do we have? We already talked about feeding. We've got Ultra Bee dry pollen sub out for my pollen substitute here because I didn't have those patties in Randy's study to go by before. So now if you're in the northern United States, it's still cold and you're trying to get ahead of things, you want to boost brood, these boost brood. So no question about it. They did extremely well. And Randy in his study fed these all through an area that had a heavy dearth right through the summer. So his study, they weren't listed necessarily as, for example, winter patties or spring boosting patties, but something that you put on that is protein enriched, that has real pollen in it, for example, that would boost brood in spring to really measurable, significant levels. So those of you who need to boost brood, if you're, now you might be looking at this going, oh, I'm going to get that. I'm a backyard beekeeper. I'm going to boost my brood. Well, if you're a backyard beekeeper and you don't need huge numbers of bees in your colonies, you don't need any of that. So if you've got pollen coming in on your landing boards right now and they're bringing in 10 or more per minute, and you're like some of the people that put questions on here today and said, yeah, I've got 2 deep boxes. When can I split? When can I do walkaway splits? I need to divide these bees and they're just booming and things like that. Don't get it in your head that you have to buy, spring patties or pollen patties or anything, or even Ultra Bee dry pollen sub. You don't need it. It's a feel-good thing that people kind of want to do because they know that, look at these top performing, results. So if you're a commercial beekeeper, you're going to be looking at seriously boosting brood and things like that. But if you're a backyard beekeeper and your only goal is to get some bees, to get some honey. They're bringing in pollen. Look what's going on. The environment's great. You really don't need to add any of these supplements on there. And if you've got a really strong colony coming out of winter, and nectar and stuff like that is going to be coming in soon, you don't even need to put sugar syrup on and things like that. So you can leave the bees to do their own thing, and they'll do just fine. Their numbers won't be as big. You're not going to be stacking 6 supers on your hive and posting pictures on social media about how successful you are as a beekeeper after you've boosted and pushed everything you possibly can. That's not necessary for backyard beekeeping. I don't know what you would do with all the honey, for starters. So I want to keep it in perspective that just because we say these are the top performing patties, this is the best protein you can give your bees, this is the biggest colony you're going to get, we're not trying to make the grade for almond pollination or other pollination contracts and things like that, which pay these people by the frame of bees. And Randy's a commercial beekeeper. Vested interest in understanding how to boost the colonies because that translates into real money. I think he said it was $25 a frame of bees going into the pollination for almonds this year. So the more frames of bees you have, the more money you get per colony, and it grades your colony, and cha-ching, you know. So, but for the backyard beekeeper, let's be honest, I don't think you need it. I'm not going to put a bunch of those patties all over my beehives because they're going to do just fine without them, I think. I do still have the Hive Live fondant on, left over from winter, because they haven't finished consuming that, and that impacts nosema. So for me, I have an interest in lowering the nosema in the digestive system of my honeybees because it's going to affect overall performance in spring. And since I already have them and they're already on, that's fine for me. And look what we're facing, more winter weather. So that's it. Links to that information in the description. I'll also link Randy Oliver's study so that you can look at that and see what it was. If you're a commercial guy or a sideliner and you're trying to get extra money from your bees and meaningful honey production is going to be important to you, then I do recommend that you put those on. So, but just general backyard users, I don't see it as absolutely necessary. So that's it for today. I want to thank you for being here and spending your time learning a little bit, I hope, and listening in on what other questions were posted by other viewers. Oh, turn away if you don't like sales. Because this, by the way, is a coffee cup that I've mentioned before. It is wall-to-wall bees, and this is a picture that I took. But what's interesting is when you go somewhere to your fellowship and you're all sitting around and you're drinking coffee, you bring things up. Queen honeybee is right here. Worker bees are here. Pollen is in the cells. There are, what's a drone bee? Oh, this one right here with eyes that come together at the top of its head with no space in between. So it has an unobstructed view of the virgin queens when he flies to that drone congregation area. So you have workers, the queen's retinue, all the different frame things all in one coffee cup. And the reason that I bring it up is because it's on my Teespring page, the way to be. And you get a discount right now if you write Fred Ship, FREDSHIP, all in caps, then free shipping. So, which means I make 75 cents per cup if you go to Teespring and buy it when you're not paying for the shipping. So that's it for today. Thanks for being here. I hope you have a fantastic weekend ahead, and make sure that you got your fondant still on and everything else. If you're in the Northeast, you're in the path of this winter storm that's going to come through and ruin your honeybees foraging day. So thank you for being here. Have a fantastic weekend.